Support for this podcast comes from the Central Valley Journalism Collaborative, connecting communities with the resources, infrastructure, and networks to ensure a vibrant local free press.
From KVPR in Fresno, this is Central Valley Daily. It's Friday, June 19th. I'm Sarith Hawk. If you've ever visited Yosemite National Park, did you ever stop and focus on the animals that fill this part of the Sierra?
What my goal was in writing this book was what makes these animals uniquely Yosemite, or what is unique about them in the context of the Yosemite landscape.
One local author did, and she put together a whole book about it. Today, as you get ready to make those summer road trip plans, we revisit our conversation with Beth Pratt in just a moment. But first, these headlines. Wildlife officials captured a mountain lion that was loose in the city of Hanford. Home security footage found the animal in the neighborhood of Ashton Park on Wednesday morning. The Hanford Police Department began getting reports and contacted the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. Hours later, city officials announced the animal was tranquilized. This is the latest sighting of a wild animal in the valley. In previous instances, black bears were seen running through valley neighborhoods. A proposal to temporarily increase taxes on billionaires in California has enough support to qualify for the November ballot. The so-called billionaire's tax is aimed at countering federal cuts to health care for low-income people. The state's top elections official said this week that petitioners have collected more than the roughly 875,000 signatures needed to place the tax on the ballot. A California lawmaker wants to cut off state financial incentives for companies involved in federal immigration enforcement. Bay Area Assemblymember Liz Ortega's bill would make businesses that operate private detention facilities or contract with immigration enforcement agencies ineligible for certain state grants, loans, and tax credits.
The intent of AB 2465 is to make sure that not a single tax dollar from the state of California goes towards companies that are collaborating or working with ICE and making a profit off the fear and the terrorization that's happening in our communities.
The measure passed the Assembly and now heads to the Senate Revenue and Taxation Committee. State lawmakers are advancing controversial legislation to remove fish and wildlife hunting age restrictions for kids battling life-threatening illnesses. Rob Oakley is with Hunt of a Lifetime, a group that connects critically ill children with hunting programs.
We take them from a hospital situation, and most of the time these families can't afford any sort of vacation or opportunity to go out. It opens up a great opportunity for them, but I'm starting to tear up because I'm thinking about some of the kids that I've taken out that aren't with us.
Opponents are critical of exposing vulnerable children to the violence of hunting. The legislation has passed the Assembly Parks and Wildlife Committee and heads next to appropriations.
Public radio is now 100% community supported. Federal funding is gone and isn't likely to come back. That means you have the opportunity to help keep KVPR's trusted and informative coverage on the air. Do your part today and become a new monthly member. We're all in this together. Join the movement and help sustain public radio service. Donate at kvpr.org.
And now to our main story. School's out for summer, and it's the perfect time to get outdoors. If you're planning to visit Yosemite National Park, you may be used to looking up at the granite cliffs of El Capitan and Half Dome. But there's just as much to see on the ground, especially with the many wildlife species inhabiting the park. That's exactly what author Beth Pratt wants people to pay attention to. She's a longtime conservationist who has spent decades exploring and studying wildlife in Yosemite. She has a new book titled Yosemite Wildlife: The Wonder of Animal Life in the Sierra Nevada. It's the first book in more than 100 years dedicated to documenting Yosemite's wildlife, and we thought now is the perfect time to revisit our conversation with her. Here's KVPR's Elizabeth Arkalian speaking to Beth about what inspired this book in the first place.
A lifelong love of wildlife since I was a little girl, and I grew up back east. In Massachusetts. I loved wildlife. Frogs were my first animal growing up because we didn't have any big wildlife in Massachusetts at the time. They'd all been banished from the neighborhoods. But I also love national parks, and when I was a little girl, I would look at these picture books, and I still have them of like national parks of the U.S. And I just remember thinking, someday, I'm gonna go work in these parks, and I did. I have moved to California after college and have been here ever since, and worked in Yosemite for a decade. I worked in Yellowstone National Park for 4 years, so I achieved that dream. But this book was literally born in 1992. I just moved to California, and of course, one of the first things that I did was go to visit Yosemite. And I was really lucky. It was a day where they had a big storm, and there wasn't a lot of people in Yosemite Valley, which we all know how rare that is. And I had a four-wheel drive vehicle, and I had the valley almost to myself. And I saw this coyote. I had never seen a wild coyote because we just at the time in Massachusetts, they had all been banished. And I'm in this incredibly beautiful place. I had never seen anything like it, El Capitan, Half Dome. And here's this a marvelous wild animal who walks past me as I'm making a snowman. I have a picture of this coyote on my website. And I wanted to learn more about the park's wildlife and write about it as a writer. And that's where this book was born. I actually wrote in my journal that I wanted to do this. I made a homemade book. And then I set out now for over 30 years to be in the park and learn about the park wildlife over time. I knew I couldn't just write about wildlife on my park visit. So here we are, 33 years later, if my math is correct. And, over 3 decades of observing the park wildlife, studying them, being out there. That's this book was born. That coyote's magical, meeting of me, he inspired this book.
Yeah, an auspicious coyote. Now, you wrote the book and Rob Hirsch photographed the images, and there's just an astounding number of animals in the books and photographs of them. So how did this specific project come together?
Yeah, so for me, how it came together, there was that magical coyote moment. But then when I, started wanting to learn about the wildlife so I could write about them, I discovered Joseph Grinnell and Tracy Storr's landmark book and study that they did in the early 1900s. The book came out in 1924, and it's called Animal Life in the Yosemite. And they spent years out in the field full time, observing the wildlife. And then I realized another book focused solely on Yosemite wildlife had not been written since then. I couldn't believe it. I kept Googling, when Google became a thing later on and as a project. So it also merged with that magical coyote moment. I wanted to continue their legacy. So I worked on it for, again, decades.
Wow.
And just as I got close, and a lot of that was field observation, being in the research library, studying some of the wildlife, like the higher elevation animals like pika and butterflies I love. But I started getting ready. I think, it's ready now. I have enough here. I feel like I had the expertise. And so I started shopping it around in about 2019, and there were a lot of publishers interested, or some. And for most of the history of the book, I thought I would just use different photographers, right? Whoever had the best photo of the animal. But I met Rob Hirsch when he asked me to write an essay about the pika for his book, which was on Yosemite. And I just loved his work. So it was 2021. I'm just getting ready to accept some offers for this book. And I asked him, do you have enough to do all the photos or most of them? Because I love your work. You tell a story with your photos. And he agreed. And that's where Rob came on, and that he's bringing, decades himself of photographing the park's wildlife to the book. I think it really elevates the work. And then at the same time, Yosemite Conservancy said yes. And although others were interested, they were perfect. They wanted to invest in it. I mean, it's a 456-page book. And they aligned with my vision, which was pretty much go big or go home. If we're going to do this 100-year book, we're going to put photos. We're going to put archival material. We're not just going to make it a field guide. We're going to tell fully the story of these animals. So I can't thank the Yosemite Conservancy enough for investing in this 100-year book.
Yeah, just to describe it for listeners, as you said, it's over 400 pages. It's like a big coffee table book. The images are fantastic. And I was really struck by how many photos show the wildlife really blending into the background. They're sort of hidden like little
Yep.
treasures that you might not see if you weren't looking for them. And I'm especially thinking of the brown creeper bird, which was nestled
Yes.
in the bark. Yeah. And the
Mhm.
Sierra tree frog is on like a mossy rock. So was that intentional to show even these small creatures that we might sometimes miss if we're on a hike or at the park?
Yeah, I think what you bring up is what I love about Rob's photography, and it was very much intentional. Again, this isn't a field guide, it's not an ID book. Rob's photos himself tell the story of the animals in the context of the landscape. And to me, that's the overall goal of this book as well, to inspire wonder, to inspire discovery, to detail the science. But there's been many books, say, written on the black bear or even frogs. So what we really tried to focus on, what my goal was in writing this book, was what makes these animals uniquely Yosemite, or what is unique about them in the context of the Yosemite landscape. And that's what I think, Rob's choices of photos to tell a story does well. These aren't just, a portrait or, a glamour shot of this
Sure.
wildlife. It shows them within the context of the landscape. And that's why he was the perfect photographer for this project.
I was surprised to see a bald eagle in your book, and you write that those sightings are pretty rare, but you've seen them over the years. So I'm curious, when you're out in the field for the book or just for pleasure, what's sort of your
Mhm.
process when you're looking for wildlife? Is it happenstance or do you go out searching? What's that like?
For me, it's a combination of everything. I think, even in my backyard here, and I live on 6 acres outside Yosemite. I have a lot of the wildlife in that book that's in my backyard, mountain lions, bears, you name it. But just stay open. For me, I'm less, especially now as I've gotten in my 50s, I'm less concerned on getting to the top of a peak or,
Mm-hmm.
making the ultimate destination. Is just being out there and being open to whatever I see. I actually am a volunteer researcher for the National Park Service. And in the summer, I do the same routes once or twice a week and just record everything I see. And, that in itself has led to some incredible discoveries. There are so that route I take a lot, but there are some animals I'm actively studying and not just, which is the pika, alpine butterflies, especially. I'm going and actually actively observing and looking with the purpose of, learning more about their behavior. But for me, and this is what I love, is open to anybody, these stories of this wildlife is unfolding daily. All you have to do is be there and be open and see what wonder is going to pop up. And I love that in my, over 30 years now of visiting this park, the experiences have been absolutely monumental. And those same experiences are open to anybody.
I love that. I also really liked this quote from the book that says, Half Dome should also be viewed as somebody's home. I'd love if you could explain what you mean by that.
That's my favorite line in the book, actually. I remember when I wrote it, it was like, that's what I love about writing. Where did that come from? That's perfect. But yeah, to me, that's it, is that, we look at a Yosemite and most people come and they look at, Half Dome as this geologic wonder. They come to the park and they take photos of this incredible scenery. But we should actually be looking at not just Half Dome, but the entire park is, we're visitors to these animals' home. The national parks are the greatest level of protection in all of our public lands for wildlife. And so I hope that, park visitors can also, as much as they're enjoying the scenery and some of the recreation they do, maybe stop and consider who really, this park is home to, and ensure that these animals stay protected by their behavior. I think for Yosemite especially, we tend to focus on the scenery. The wildlife is not as obvious sometimes. I worked in Yellowstone National Park for 4 years, and it's kind of the joke in the park world. You go to Yellowstone for the scenery, and Yellowstone for the wildlife, and you go to Yosemite for the scenery. And
Mm.
neither is correct. There's incredible scenery in Yellowstone, and there's incredible, obviously, wildlife in Yosemite. But in Yellowstone, the wildlife is everywhere. You got 1,000, elk that you see at one time, or 500 bison. So I think the reason Yosemite, most people aren't aware of the incredible wildlife there, is because you don't see a lot of it. You're not going to see wildlife on a scale that you do in a Yellowstone. But boy, is it there. And the biodiversity and the unique stories and animals are incredible.
That was Elizabeth Arkalian speaking with conservationist and author Beth Pratt. And that's today's show. We want to wish you a happy Father's Day weekend ahead. Today's episode was produced by Jonathan Linden, Elizabeth Arkalian, Crescencio Rodriguez Delgado, and KVPR, with support from the Central Valley Journalism Collaborative. I'm Sarith Hawk. You can find the latest local news anytime at kvpr.org.
Each story you hear on Planet Money starts with a question. What happens if we refund tariffs? Why are groceries so expensive? At NPR, we stand for your right to be curious, because the forces shaping our world can be hard to see. Follow NPR's Planet Money wherever you get your podcasts and start seeing how the economy really works.